Welcome to Jill Cameron Creations. Today we're going to take a look at doing Distress Oxide Ink smooshing and the micro glaze over top of it. I'm doing this on photo paper. It's just some photo paper I had here that's glossy. I'm doing this the normal way the first time and show you how I do this. The palette that I'm using here to ink smoosh everything on could be made by stacking some white cardstock together, cutting it down to the size that you want, and adhering it together and running it through a laminator and then trimming it out. This was a backer board for a stamp set, and I just converted it into something that I could use for ink smooshing. You'll want to dry in between each layer and make sure that each layer is 100% dry before you move on to the next one. I like the look of the layers instead of doing all the ink together. That's just my personal preference. You could definitely do all the ink together. If you're using the black soot or a brown, I wouldn't recommend it. I would do that separate and then do your other colors together potentially. The board that I'm drying everything on is a culinary board. I will link to it in the description below as well as over on my blog. I'm just using a mini mister to mist everything there and get the ink a little bit wetter than it comes off of the ink pad. One thing I discovered as I was doing this is the oxidation in between each layer kind of distorts the color. And I know that's the purpose of the Distress Oxide inks, is that they have the oxidation, and it looks really good on cardstock, and it has a very different effect on glossy paper. So the first time I did this, I went ahead and just did this normally like I normally would, but right before I added the micro glaze, I did wipe the panel off because I noticed it was coming off on my fingers anyway, so I wanted to see what it would do. So I wiped the panel off, and I could still see really distinct oxidation in between the color layers on here. So I added the micro glaze to see if it would take any of it up. It made it very, very shiny, and it does protect your panel from, any kind of moisture from ink or anything like that. If you're going to stamp on this, you definitely want to use the micro glaze. If you were going to just die cut this or use it just as a card front and add die cuts on top of it, anything like that, you don't necessarily need the micro glaze if you just wipe the panel off before you use it. So the second time I did this, I wanted to see if the colors would be more vibrant if I wiped it off in between the layers, and so that's what I did here. And I added a lot of purple to my panel. I did it twice, and I wiped everything off in between each layer and got the oxidation off, and it looks amazing. Absolutely love the results of wiping it off in between each layer and of getting all that oxidation off in between each layer. I mean, just look at that purple, but look at the difference in that purple between what the actual color is and the panel itself. Just an amazing difference there, and all the colors are like that. So I wiped everything off, and I'm going to make cards out of these panels. I did use Stays On ink, and I'm going to show you making the card in just a minute, but I just wanted to talk about it, the Stays On ink, really quick. Don't forget that when you have photopolymer stamps and you're using Stays On ink, just use your regular stamp cleaner and clean them really, really good. Stays On ink is a solvent ink, and you don't want to use the solvent cleaner on it because it can scar and ruin your photopolymer stamps. So just be aware of that. And I'm just using a paper towel to buff this off. The green cloth that I used at first on the very first panel kind of drug a little too much. It stuck to the panel too much, so I decided not to use that and just went with the paper towel. And the only reason that I put the paintbrush and the ink over here is I wanted it to be a little less square because it was pretty square all the time. So I just moved the ink around a little bit and squished the water around so I could get a better coverage for that pink. Don't forget to dry in between every single layer. Either let it set in air dry or dry it with your heat tool. That culinary board is amazing to do that. So wipe everything off. I did add the micro glaze, And like I said before, if you're going to stamp on this, then you definitely need to add the micro glaze to it. So now we're going to cut this panel down, and I cut it down to about 3 inches wide by 5.5 inches tall. And we're going to go ahead and add that to a card front. And I just trimmed off the bottom and the sides a little bit. I think I cut like about a half inch off of each side, made it about 3 inches wide. And I'm sorry the bottom of it's cut off there. I couldn't get my paper trimmer to go up any further because I had stuff sitting there. So we're just going to put this on another piece of cardstock paper. Photo paper is a little thinner than cardstock, so I just wanted it to have a little bit more stability, be a little bit heavier duty. And went ahead and cut down a piece of 80-pound Neenah Solar White cardstock and just backed that with it. I use a Misty stamping tool, and you'll see that in just a second, to stamp everything. I would recommend, the one thing that I learned when I was doing this is, of course, photopolymer stamps stick to everything, fingers included. And one thing that I would do is put either a piece of paper or a piece of acetate in between the stamps and the stamp in the Misty and your panel, just so it doesn't stick so bad when you're trying to position it. So I'm going to use that big wow sentiment there from My Favorite Things stamp set. And again, all of the products will be linked below in the description and also over on my blog. And pardon my big old head. And so my finger wouldn't stick to it, I just shoved it with a little piece of paper. So we're going to stamp this first in StazOn ink. Remember, don't clean it with StazOn cleaner on your photopolymer stamps. Fine on rubber, not on photopolymer. And I did a really basic card. At the end of the video, I will show you how I stepped these up a little bit. And I made 2 additional panels, one in teal and one in reds and oranges. And wanted to show you how you could step up a simple card just by adding a cardstock panel behind it with some tone-on-tone stamping, and also another popped up sentiment on it, or even die cutting the word wow out of some die cut letters and adding the sentiment popped up with some embossing on it. So I have those at the end of this video. I mean, this is just a typical card creation here, putting everything together. I eyeball everything, sorry about my big old head, and make sure that it's straight. I use the lines on my Misty all the time. I have a Tim Holtz stamp platform, not a huge fan of it. I use it if I was teaching classes and that kind of thing, and I needed more than one stamp platform. But other than that, it gets piled up under stuff, and I don't use it a whole lot. So I popped this up using some foam tape, and I make sure that it's dry, that StazOn ink is dry, even though it pretty much dries instantly. I just wanted to make sure. That Teflon bone folder that I have in my hand is the most amazing bone folder I have ever used, ever. It doesn't mark the paper, doesn't make it shiny. I absolutely love it. And it was the best 12 bucks I ever spent in my life. I use Scotch foam tape. It's easy to tear, and you don't have any problems getting the release paper off of it, and for me, it's the perfect height. I do have some of the Doris strips that I use for sentiment sometimes, but I think it's a little too high for my taste sometimes, but sometimes it's a whole lot easier than cutting down a strip of that. I also have a ton of sequins. I'm going to talk about it. I don't show it in the video, but I have the Doris Elizabeth Designs trays that have the tiny containers in them, and the containers that lay on their side, and you can put just tons of containers in them. And I get all of my sequins from Cartwright sequins. I very, very seldom buy a mix of any sequins. I usually buy them all in the packs from Cartwright, and they are all solid colors and all different sizes, all different finishes, and you get a ton of sequins, and it's a lot less expensive. To me, it is anyway. The container that I have here is just a mix of all of the sequins wouldn't fit in the container that I put them in, so I just dumped the balance of them in one big container, and I'll pull out the colors I need and dump the rest of them back in there and just use them. This is the Marvy Jewel Picker. There's mixed reviews out there about it. I really, really like it. I like it better than any of the other jewel pickers that I've ever used. This one has two ends. I will pick up sequins and move them around with the red end, which is the teeny tiny one, and then I will put them on my card with the green end, which is the bigger one. The bigger sequins you do most of the time have to help it along to come off because it's just more surface to stick to the tacky end. And I just put a dot of glue down, pick it up. Well, I pick it up, put a dot of glue down, and I use my pinky to help move it off of the jewel picker. To me, that's just no big deal. Kelly Ledavola does the clear glossy accents inside of her sequins when she puts them on her panels. Absolutely love this. It makes your sequins so pretty. It just adds a little bit of sparkle and shine to the card. So I've been doing that recently. Absolutely love it. Thank you, Kelly. So now we're going to take a look at the other cards that I made real quick. And one of them is this one right here is just the basic card that I made. And then the middle one, it has the backing behind it. All of that's popped up. And I added some sequins and popped up the middle sentiment. And I want to thank you so much for joining me today. And if you have any questions or comments, let me know. Be sure to subscribe. Have a great day.